man. He was, I don't know what, I guess he was in the 60s.
She ordered champagne the moment she heard he was dead. But the person who showed up at his funeral and carried his casket was the last person anyone on Earth expected. And when you find out who it was, everything you thought you knew about William Frawley changes completely. At his funeral, someone walked through that door that made every single person in that room stop breathing for a second. Not because they were a big star, not because anyone expected them, but because of what it meant that they showed up at all. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why that moment said more about William Frawley than anything he ever did on camera. The real William Frawley was nothing like what you saw on your TV screen. He was born in 1887 in a small town in Iowa. He grew up Catholic, sang in the church choir, and by the time he was in his 20s, he was performing in vaudeville, one of the most brutal entertainment circuits that ever existed. Vaudeville didn't make soft people, it made survivors. And Frawley survived it longer than most. By 1916, he had signed with Paramount Studios and spent the next 3.5 decades appearing in over 100 films, 100 movies. And yet by 1951, his career was basically over. The roles had stopped coming. The phone wasn't ringing anymore, and everyone in Hollywood knew exactly why. William Frawley had a serious drinking problem, the kind that had gotten him fired from jobs, pushed off sets, and quietly blacklisted by people who didn't want the headache. At 64 years old, he was one bad week away from being completely forgotten. And then a Cuban band leader named Desi Arnaz made a phone call that changed everything. The network didn't want Frawley. The sponsors didn't want him either. Even Lucille Ball wasn't sure. But Desi looked at this old, rough, complicated man and made a deal that nobody else was willing to make. He told the network he would personally fire Frawley if he missed a single day of work because of drinking. That was it. That was the whole arrangement. And Frawley, who had nothing left to lose, said yes. What happened next was television history. I Love Lucy became the most watched show in the entire country. And Fred Mertz became one of the most beloved characters ever put on screen. Frawley was nominated for an Emmy 5 years in a row. He never won. He didn't talk about it much, because for the first time in years, he had something more important than an award. He had steady work, a real paycheck, and a man who had believed in him when nobody else would. But there was one person on that set who could not stand him, and she never tried to hide it. Her name was Vivian Vance, and she played Ethel Mertz, Fred's wife on the show. The day she arrived at the studio and found out that this old man would be playing her husband, she said, not quietly, not carefully, "Husband, that old kook could be my grandfather." She wasn't trying to be cruel. She probably didn't even think twice about it. But William Frawley was already there, standing close enough to hear every single word. And from that moment forward, he never forgave her. Not once, not even a little bit. For 6 years, they worked side by side. They said their lines, they hit their marks. They made millions of Americans laugh every single week. And then they went to their separate corners and made no secret of how much they disliked each other. Frawley called her names that wouldn't make it past any editor. She complained to anyone who would listen that she was being forced to pretend to be married to a man old enough to be her grandfather. When I Love Lucy ended and they were offered their own spin-off show, a guaranteed hit, guaranteed money, Frawley said yes immediately. Vivian Vance said absolutely not. She would rather walk away from all of it than spend one more day working with him, and she did exactly that. So when the news hit on March 3rd, 1966, that Frawley had collapsed and died, the whole entertainment world held its breath and waited to see what Vivian Vance would do. They got their answer faster than anyone expected. She was at dinner with her husband when she heard. She stood up, called for a bottle, and said those 4 words that Hollywood never forgot: "Champagne for everybody." That was her goodbye to William Frawley. No tears, no phone call. Just a toast in a restaurant full of strangers. Now you're probably thinking, okay, so she didn't go to the funeral. That makes sense. That's exactly what you'd expect from someone who ordered champagne when they found out he died. And you would be right. She wasn't there. But here's what nobody ever focuses on. Here's the part that actually matters. Because Vivian Vance staying away wasn't the surprise. The surprise was who walked through that door anyway. Lucille Ball was there. She told the press she had lost one of her dearest friends and that show business had lost one of the greatest character actors of all time. Fred McMurray was there, Frawley's co-star from My Three Sons, standing as a pallbearer. The show's producer, Don Fedderson, was there too. And then Desi Arnaz walked in. Now you might be thinking, Desi was a pallbearer. Of course he came. But stop for a second and think about who these two men actually were. William Frawley was a man from a different era, a rough era, an era that was not kind to immigrants, not kind to outsiders, and not kind to a Cuban band leader who had the nerve to run his own studio. Frawley had opinions he never bothered to keep to himself. And when he first found out that the man signing his checks, the man who had literally saved his career, was from Havana, he was not exactly thrilled about it. And Desi knew that. Desi knew exactly who William Frawley was when he hired him, but Desi hired him anyway. He went to bat for him with the network anyway. He protected him, paid him well, and made sure Frawley had a residuals deal that would pay him and his family long after the show stopped running, something almost unheard of for actors at that time. And slowly, stubbornly, in a way that Frawley would never have admitted out loud, something shifted between them. Not publicly. Frawley was not built for public warmth. But privately, behind closed doors, in the long, quiet spaces between takes and rehearsals, these two men who should have had nothing in common became something real. They became friends. So when Desi Arnaz walked into that funeral and took his place beside the casket, he wasn't just there out of obligation or professionalism. He was there because he genuinely cared about this man. And the way he said goodbye wasn't with a speech or a quote for the cameras. He took out a full-page ad in every major Hollywood trade paper. No long tribute, no list of credits, just 3 words in Spanish. Buenas noches, amigo. Good night, friend, that's it. That was Desi's eulogy for William Frawley. And those 3 words said everything the champagne toast didn't. Here's what I want you to sit with for a second. The whole world remembers Vivian Vance's reaction. The champagne. The restaurant. The 4 words. It's been repeated in interviews and documentaries and gossip columns for decades, and it's a great story. But it's not the real story. The real story is that a man who had every reason to be impossible to love, who was gruff and complicated and difficult on his best days, managed to earn something that most people with perfect manners never do. He earned real loyalty from Lucille Ball, who kept hiring him right up until the very end. From Desi Arnaz, who carried his casket and called him friend. From the people who actually knew him, not just the people who watched him, Vivian Vance celebrated with champagne. Desi Arnaz carried the casket. And when you think about which of those 2 things takes more out of a person, which one costs more, which one means more, I think you already know the answer. William Frawley was not a saint. He was not easy. He was not the kind of man who made people feel comfortable or warm or welcome. But the people who truly saw him, past all the noise and the reputation and the rough edges, they didn't leave. And in the end, that might be the only thing about a person that actually matters.